do you teach something that is constantly changing? How do you teach something that is constantly changing? I've been obsessed with this question for many, many years. I first encountered it teaching English in South America and in the Peace Corps. I was hired. My mission was to teach this group of young people a new language, English, to give them access to open up doors to new jobs and new opportunities. But in every case, as soon as I opened up the textbook, the lesson plans, the exercises, I immediately saw that pretty much all of that material was completely out of date. It was based on textbooks, usually from the 90s. There was no mention of technology, no mention of the internet, no everyday slang and idioms and expressions, which is the way that we normally talk. I saw for the first time in that moment that it's really, really hard to teach something that won't hold still. Something like language that is in constant evolution. I encountered the question again in a different form when we welcomed our first child a few years ago, our son Caillou. And one day, this nurse handed me this little bundle and said, "Here you go." And I remember realizing in that moment, oh my God, I am now responsible. There was no user manual, there was no orientation guide, there was no certification that I had to complete to be responsible for teaching this child the values and principles that he would need to live a good life. And I just remember thinking, how can this be when my own values and principles, my own definition of what it even means to live a good life is still changing? But I've encountered this question most of all in my work and in my business. And this is the story that I want to share with you today. It is a case study in what it means, what it can mean, what it can look like to build a community-centric business, a community-driven education business. This is where it all started. 2016, on my desk, in my bedroom, just a few feet from my bed. This was before COVID times, so I didn't even have a good excuse. With a lot of tech and a lot of screens, as you can see. That was when I started teaching an online course called Building a Second Brain. Anyone heard of it by any chance? Any fans? Awesome. And there wasn't even a name for the subject that I was teaching at the time. There wasn't even a category. I called it digital note-taking, how to use digital notes apps like you would find on your phone, Apple Notes, Evernote, Google Keep, Microsoft OneNote, Notion, these kind of softwares. But eventually that category would grow and thrive and kind of flower into a whole discipline, a whole field that today is called PKM, Personal Knowledge Management. It's the science and the art of how humans relate to information. Information and knowledge, how we store it, how we access it, how we organize it, how we utilize it. But at the time, I didn't even have, I had some ideas, I had some experiments, I had some interesting findings, but nothing that you could even call a curriculum. There was no way that I could sit down and say, these are the exact lessons, these are the units, these are the modules. Which means I couldn't do what at the time, and still in many ways today, is the standard online course, which is what? A long series of pre-recorded videos of a talking head, someone standing there talking at you and telling you the right answers. There were no right answers at the time. And so I went about it a very different way. This was 2016, and there was this brand new platform that people had just started talking about pretty much only in Silicon Valley called Zoom. Okay. People didn't know what it was. It was super weird. They had to figure out their webcam. It took a lot of training and orientation. But I started teaching the course live. I had an agenda. I had some speaker's notes. But it was essentially a conversation. I would present something. We would discuss it, debate it. We sometimes had raging debates on different topics. People would offer their own ideas, their own contributions, something that they had figured out in their own use of the software. And we would talk for hours over this new thing called Zoom. And it kept going. It was very messy in the beginning. We didn't really know what we were doing, but I kept teaching cohort after cohort. Every 6 months or so, I would teach a new cohort. The very first one in 2016 was 12 people, and then it was 30, and then it was 60, and then it was 100, and it kept growing and growing and growing from there as this idea that you can use software to store and manage your knowledge kind of picked up steam and grew. In the years since, a few things have happened. Starting in 2019, I started working on a book that was published just last year by the same name, Building a Second Brain, where I got all the content from that course and put it into book form. Went on TV, morning news shows, went on some stages, became a YouTuber, learned to make those funny faces, took weeks of training, and eventually, in this bottom left quadrant, throughout this whole period, I'm continuing to teach these cohorts, which are growing bigger and bigger. In the midst of the pandemic, at the height of everyone's fear and isolation, when we didn't know what was going to happen, and all we had pretty much was our connectivity, our internet friends, we taught a cohort as large as 1,000 people. 1,000 people signed up of their own free will to learn about digital note-taking and knowledge management from over 100 different countries, all learning at the same time, at the same pace, in the same virtual space together. It's one of the most profound and meaningful experiences of my career. Once again, throughout all these experiences, I encountered the same question. How do you teach, in this case, a little bit reformulated, how do you teach a subject based on a technology that is constantly changing? This was the main challenge that I had. Because you see, knowledge management, it is an academic field, does have research and papers and conferences, but it is primarily a practical discipline. It's really about what people do in their day-to-day lives and in their day-to-day work, which means every 3 to 6 months, there's a revolution. Some new software program comes out, it might be Rome Research, it might be Notion, it might be an AI-based note-taking app. Every 3 to 6 months, the ground shifts under our feet, and all the best practices and the teachings and the strategies and the tactics that worked 6 months ago suddenly are obsolete. And we almost have to reinvent it from scratch, not just once, but again and again and again. And this is where I want you to think about your own situation. I'm curious, how many of you, just by show of hands, have a community or run a community where there's some educational or learning aspect? Okay, maybe 95%, I would guess. Okay, so let me ask you a different question. For how many of you does your community have some sort of component that is technology, or some relationship or some connection to technology? Okay, maybe 90%, great. So I really want to speak to the intersection of these two things. You have to teach something, right? Which means you need things like learning objectives, you need a curriculum, you need modules, you need content, which all has to be planned and recorded and scripted and all the stuff. And if you even touch one finger, if you even have one finger in the technological world, it's all changing all the time, isn't it? New software is coming out, new hardware is coming out, the internet is changing, the media is changing. So I want to take you back to the moment that we kind of squared this circle. There was a key moment where we made a change. We took a different path than we would have otherwise that allowed us to make that intersection of learning and technology into our strength and into a moat instead of a weakness. So rewind back to the early years, 2016, 2017, 2018. In the beginning, this course was very humble. It was not this grand thing about knowledge and information in the future. All I was trying to do my only intention was to teach people how to use one software program, which is called Evernote. Any Evernote fans? Cool. Their headquarters they've now left and been acquired by an Italian company, but until very recently was just down the street here in Redwood City. So all I wanted to do was teach people, just a few people, how to use this one software program. And even with this one software program, it was really just about how I use it. It was just my personal way of using this one software program. But then we started to receive questions and eventually critiques about what about everyone else, right? People said, well, I use a different software program. I use Microsoft OneNote. I use Simple Note. I use Apple Notes. I use Google Keep. People started to ask, what about different life situations? I have kids. I work remotely. People in different backgrounds, different industries, different fields who weren't in tech or tech adjacent. People of different ages, people of different cultures, people of different languages. All these requests started to come in for us to adapt what we were doing to essentially a different context, far more than we could ever handle, even if we wanted to, even if we tried. And I remember at the time, there was such a strong temptation to sort of put up walls and kind of retreat, right? Which would be something like putting on a disclaimer, giant disclaimer on the website. This is just my personal interpretation. Take what you will. I make no claims to, other apps, kind of turning people away that have those other needs. But I didn't take that path. There was a different one that I took instead, which was to really try to find what were the timeless principles of note-taking and knowledge management. What about what I was doing, those first few students? There was something that we were doing that I believed, basically on faith at the time, that was timeless, that transcended any particular software program, that transcended even any particular era, that even transcended technology itself. And I set out on this journey to find what those were, the timeless principles of note-taking and knowledge management. And you know what? I failed. It was not possible. I very quickly saw that I could not step out of my own context. I really couldn't. I couldn't imagine what it was like to live on the other side of the world, or to have kids, or to be in a different industry, or to be a different age. I just couldn't. I was who I was, and I couldn't see the world through these other perspectives. We started talking about this in our course. This is one just screenshot of a conversation. We started talking about what it would mean to try to cover all these bases, to translate this core set of ideas to all these different people's situations. And this idea came up, I believe, in this conversation that you see right here, to start recruiting mentors. We created a new position called alumni mentors, which were students that had taken the program, completed it, been successful, had a transformational, a big impact on their lives and their work. We recruited them by application. It was a competitive application. We trained them, oriented them, hired them, paid them to be essentially the instructors. This is one of our first group of mentors that you see on the screen. And I remember at the time being terrified. This seemed like not a good idea, to put these people who were not teachers, had no certifications, no formal qualifications. Their only qualification was the fact that they'd completed a program and they had liked it and had a desire to come back and teach others. This was the key moment in the growth of the program. The key moment when it became not just about Evernote, when it became not just about me and my personal use of digital note-taking. It's when the cohorts really started to grow. We started to see that when someone who was considering taking the program looked at this image, which we would put on social media, on our website, when they saw someone that looked like them, they could just ignore all our other marketing, all our other claims, all the other evidence. When they saw someone who was not just in the community, but a leader of the community that looked like them, they were in. Time and time again. This is the only way. This group of people are the only possible way that you can even conceive of teaching 1,000 students through active, interactive, back and forth, two-way teaching that I know of, that I know of is empowering, recruiting, training leaders from the community. The weird thing is, as the cohorts grew, my job, my role, became, in a way, less and less. I was doing less and less of the teaching, less and less of the content creation, even less and less of the people management, which is not really my strength. And there arrived a moment where I realized we had created something really different here, a different kind of model, which is a model where there is no single instructor, right? There was 20 or 30 of them. There was no textbook. These days we have the book, but at the time there was no textbook. There was no fixed curriculum. In fact, every cohort was completely different. People would come back for a second cohort and be like, everything changed because the people that are in that cohort changed, and also because the technological world had changed as well. So no fixed curriculum, no tests, no degree. There was no extrinsic motivation here. There was nothing that their boss or their organization was requiring them to do. They were there because they wanted to be. And of course, as you all well know, the community that we had created almost accidentally didn't exist on any single platform. It was across so many of them. It was on Zoom, it was on Discourse, it was on Circle, it was on Twitter, it was on Facebook groups, so many different places, most of them, Slack, so many of them, most of them that we never approved of, planned for, or even knew about until they were quite well formed. I started thinking of what we had accidentally done as community-driven learning. I started to see that community was not a feature, it wasn't a little side benefit, it wasn't an accessory, it wasn't a supporting thing, it was almost the whole story. Okay, not even the content of our course stayed the same. The thing that we really had, and we didn't really have it, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, was this broiling, active soup and mixture of people and ideas and conversations and relationships. I think of community-driven learning as learning by, through, and from, so all the things. Everything happens through a community of practice. Notice that I don't say a learning community, right? It's not just a community that likes to talk about and think of and study something. It's a community of practice. That practice is key. They're actually going out and trying things in businesses, on teams, with products, in the real world where the real information is, and coming back and sharing what they were discovering. Now, some of you may be thinking, okay, Tiago, crowdsourcing. You've invented crowdsourcing. Yes. It is a valid question. But I think something has changed about crowdsourcing. If you remember the early years of crowdsourcing, what was it, maybe 10, 15 years ago when that was kind of the big buzzword? That first kind of era of crowdsourcing was mostly about ideation, about brainstorming, right? Someone would say, oh, we crowdsourced something. What did that mean? It usually meant they put some prompt or question or challenge out there, got a huge flood of suggestions, most of them terrible. Then they got the good ones, and some executive committee filtered it down to the winner. That's what we called crowdsourcing 1.0. What we see in our community is something very, very different, which is that the tools that the crowd now has access to, and I really mean specific, concrete tools, are more powerful, far more powerful, more intelligent, and more democratized than they were a decade or two ago. I'll give you one example. And this happened many times. I would be in a Zoom call and I would mention offhand something that I would like to exist, or some resource or asset that would be nice to have. For example, oh yeah, it'd be great if we had, a database or a table with all the different note-taking apps and then columns with all of their main kind of features and characteristics. We'll get to that probably in a few years, that's kind of low priority. A couple days later, 2 or 3 days later, something arrives in my inbox, which is someone who is fanatical about, in this case, Notion, has created a beautiful dashboard with emojis and tables and interlinked databases that are interactive and can be sorted and filtered. And it's already public, so it's already ready to share. Something way better than we could have created even if we had tried. Okay? Tools like Notion, that allow you to create essentially interactive websites with zero coding knowledge. The whole no-code movement. Tools like Canva that allow you to create excellent graphic design with zero graphic design knowledge. Tools like the ones I've mentioned, Zoom, Discourse, and Circle. And now we're seeing a huge flood of AI-based tools where people are creating things that I wouldn't even know how to begin to create using AI. This is what I mean when I say that the crowd has gotten smarter, they're more empowered, they don't ask for permission all the time, sometimes to a controversial effect. They are ready and willing to step up and really not just be a contributor or an editor, but a leader, a facilitator, a teacher, a writer. Those top-level, most senior leadership roles are open to really anyone in the community that is willing to take them on. So I want to bring this back to you again. In what ways are you trying to teach something? I'll start there. What are you trying to teach? Just to have in mind the topics, the skills, the capabilities, the mindsets, the perspectives, the frameworks, the theories. Okay? And to what extent or in what ways is it hard to teach those things? Is it kind of like they're like slippery fish? Because as soon as you go to teach, let's say, generative AI, if you know anything about generative AI, in about a month, everything you knew a month ago is out of date. That phenomenon is coming or has come to many or most industries today. You try to teach something, you try to get a fixed set of best practices, and by the time you've put that into production, into something like a course or a program or whatever it is, it's changed. I think what's needed is a very different model. The old way was to hire an expert, pay them a lot of money, the top expert, to teach you the right answers. This doesn't work anymore. It's not scalable, it's too expensive, it's hard to find those experts, they're busy. It actually doesn't empower people in the community. I think the new way is to not add on the community later as a kind of, like I said, accessory or side thing, but to start with the community. You basically start on square one, assuming that you won't be able to keep up. You assume from the beginning, we know we're not going to be able to cover the frontier of everything that's changing in this field. We're not even going to try. We're not going to try to hire enough people internally, enough employees to keep track of all those things. You start with the community at the center, a community of practice that is actually putting it into practice. And you almost use that community as the engine, the generator of the insights and the ideas and the frameworks and everything else that becomes part of your curriculum. I want to share with you 4 kind of counterintuitive lessons from my experience that, at least for me, were very different from what I expected. The first was, in the early years at least, to make membership exclusive. We charged $500 for the first version of the course, way more than any other course at the time. It went up from there to $1,500 and above, and that was key. Every single person in there really wanted to be in there. You can make it exclusive through cost, or through the time needed, or by application, or by criteria. It was so important. I think the way that we were able to identify those mentors early on was by making it hard to get in. Second, make the experience as intense and engaging as possible. We ask for people to spend usually 10 to 15 hours a week for 6 weeks to take the course, just to take it. The narrative then and now is that people are lazy, they have no attention spans, everything has to be 30 seconds and super convenient and super easy. I found that's absolutely not the case. People are hungry. They're so hungry for challenges that are worthy of their attention, worthy of their time and effort. We made it hard. Tell people exactly how to share your content. I found that the more decentralized and democratized and porous you want your community to be, the more precise and exact and specific your branding, the borders of your company need to be. We found it really, really important and valuable to publish a complete brand identity guide that anyone can use, actually encourage them to share it. We even published a sharing guide with do's and don'ts of all the ways and the things that they can share and everything that they can't share. It wasn't until we did that that we really started seeing people create their own content and share their own lessons from our program. Finally, what is our role now? What is my role? If the community does everything, and they're great and so self-sufficient, what do? I really see our job, my job, as the manufacturing line. The thing that we can do uniquely is create products, mainstream products, these tangible artifacts that then go out into the world as provocations, as conversation starters, as almost totems that carry our message. The first product was a course. Courses are not very accessible, especially live ones. People can't necessarily spend 10 to 15 hours a week for 6 weeks. So we turned it into a book. That brought in a whole another group of people. We now have t-shirts, we have stickers, we have bookmarks. I'll pass out some of those if you get a book signed later on. And the new one that I've just started working on is a TV show. Imagine what it would do. Imagine the rallying cry. Imagine the conversation starter for our community if you could turn on Netflix and see a second brain reality TV show. Okay? That is something, that kind of mainstream product creation that only we can do as a company. When I think of our community, I really think of an ecosystem, a living ecosystem. I'm not the owner of this. I can't control it. I can't even predict what it's going to do tomorrow. And I don't want to. It's this living kind of oasis of plants and animals. There's things growing and thriving and emerging, and then there's other things that are dying and decaying. There's flows of information. There's conversations and relationships and insights and breakthroughs far, far beyond what we can even keep track of, much less produce on our own as a company. I know that in 3 to 6 months, the whole field is going to be revolutionized again. We're going to have to rethink from first principles everything that we do and everything that we teach. But it's this community, this group of people all over the world, through their commitment, their dedication, their honesty, their courage, that gives me the peace of mind and the confidence that we'll find the new answers, the new principles, the new frameworks. So my message is that the community is the future, that community is the future of education. And the question I want to leave you with is simply, how can you be a part of it? Thank you.